I asked if he can call 911 because I just found a dead baby on the beach.
2-year-old Bella Bond, the child who was known only as Baby Doe, for nearly 3 months after her body washed up on Deer Island in a trash bag in June of 2015.
She had no name. No one filed a missing persons report. For 85 days, no one even knew she was gone, until her tiny body washed ashore in a trash bag. This is the story of Bella Bond, once known only as Baby Doe. On the morning of June 25th, 2015, a woman was walking her dog along the shoreline of Deer Island, just outside Boston. It was calm and quiet, just another routine outing. But that calm shattered when her dog suddenly stopped and became fixated on something lying in the sand. The woman looked down and saw a plastic bag, which was strange, but not unusual because trash washed up there all the time. Still, something felt off. She leaned in for a closer look. And then, she froze. Inside the bag were the remains of a little girl. There was no name tag, no ID, and no explanation. The woman called the police, and within hours, the scene was crawling with investigators. But this wasn't going to be a simple case. No missing child report matched. No witnesses came forward, and there were no signs of who she was or why she ended up there. The world wanted answers, yet for 85 long days, no one came forward. Until finally, the authorities had a name: Bella Bond. But that was just the beginning. Who was Bella? Where were her parents? What had happened to her? And why was she discarded on the edge of Deer Island? The truth was darker than anyone expected. In a matter of minutes, what had started as a quiet summer day quickly turned into a horrifying crime scene.
They have not yet identified the girl. They also have not been able to determine how she died.
Inside the plastic bag was the body of a young girl, dressed only in polka dot leggings and wrapped in a zebra print blanket. When authorities arrived at the scene, they immediately launched a search of the area, fearing there might be more victims nearby. Despite being relatively small, Deer Island is a well-known destination in Boston. It is famous for its recreational attractions, from hiking to boating, and for being home to many beautiful sights. Among its many sightseeing spots is the Logan International Airport, where visitors go to enjoy plane spotting. Sadly, this beautiful island was about to become the backdrop for a heartbreaking case that would take the police months to solve. In the heat of the search, cadaver dogs were brought in to comb the island, but after a thorough sweep turned up nothing, the search was called off. It seemed the little girl was the only one. With that confirmed, the focus shifted to the most pressing question. Who was she? No one knew it yet, but the child's identity would remain a mystery for months. Initially, investigators believed the girl had died just a few days before her body was found. But as forensic evidence rolled in, a darker truth emerged. She had been dead for weeks, possibly up to a month. Even worse, her body hadn't been left out in the elements immediately after she died. Instead, it had been stuffed into a refrigerator and kept there for weeks before being dumped on Deer Island. The first major challenge authorities faced in identifying the child was the condition of her body. Decomposition had already set in, and the bloating made it nearly impossible to recognize her facial features. On top of that, the body had been exposed to water for some time, which meant collecting fingerprints was off the table. Despite these setbacks, investigators were able to confirm that the remains belonged to a preschooler. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next big question was, how did the child's body end up on the shoreline of Deer Island?
What was truly baffling was that for months, no one came forward to identify this little girl.
One theory was that someone had intentionally dumped the body on the beach. Another possibility was that the body had been discarded elsewhere and simply drifted with the tides to Deer Island. To get answers, the U.S. Coast Guard launched an investigation. They analyzed the water currents and used that data to estimate where the plastic bag could have originated. Divers were also sent to search the surrounding area. They found a worn-out duffel bag and rusty barbells which were believed to be a part of the case. Given the state of the body, authorities ultimately ruled out the drifting theory. The decomposition wasn't advanced enough for the body to have traveled far, leading them to believe the child had been deliberately placed right where she was found. They had almost no new leads to work with, yet investigators managed to piece together a theory about how the unidentified little girl could have ended up on Deer Island. They suspected that someone who worked at a nearby wastewater treatment plant could have been involved. The area was usually bustling during the day, so the theory was that the person waited until nightfall to discreetly dispose of the plastic bag. Unfortunately, all of this was still just speculation, and the child's identity remained a mystery. Time was running out, so investigators decided it was time to try a different approach. They decided to look into the child's clothing and the blankets she had been wrapped in, hoping that it would lead them to where it was purchased and who might have purchased them. The polka dot leggings was determined to have been manufactured by the Serco company, but it could have easily been purchased at a Target store. The blankets were thought to have been produced by the Cannon Mills company, but they could have been sold at a Kmart. It quickly became clear finding the little girl's identity through this means was basically impossible. Anyone in any state could have brought these items from any store outlet, and so there was no way of connecting any purchases to the child. Next, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children stepped in and created a digital reconstruction of the child's face. Forensic artist Christy Andrews spent about 4 hours putting together an image of what she might have looked like when she was alive.
Investigators received hundreds of tips and leads, and they were chasing down those leads across Massachusetts, across the country, overseas.
On July 2nd, the image was released to the public. It showed a young girl with brown wavy hair. Police also released enhanced images of the leggings and blankets she was found with. Flyers were circulated across the state, and investigators hoped someone, somewhere, would recognize her face. While they waited for leads, the investigation pressed on. On July 3rd, an autopsy was performed. But once again, the case hit a frustrating wall. The cause of death couldn't be determined. There were no signs of injury, trauma, or suffocation, nothing obvious that could explain what had happened. Toxicology tests were run to check for drugs, toxins, alcohol, or poisons, but the results didn't offer any answers either. What they did know, however, was that the child didn't die from natural causes. Still without a name or cause of death, investigators pressed on. They estimated the child's age to be between 3 and 5 years old, with a height ranging from 3 feet 1 inch to 3 feet 6 inches, and a weight of about 30 pounds. Her hair was brown, wavy, and 14 inches long. She had no visible scars or birthmarks, but her ears were pierced. The authorities also believed she was white, but with Hispanic ancestry. With these new details, an updated version of the digital image was released, this time showing her with earrings, in hopes that it might spark someone's memory. In a rather unusual twist, the body showed no signs of abuse or malnutrition. In fact, the child seemed to have been well cared for while she was alive. This raised even more questions. Who were her parents? And why hadn't anyone come forward to claim her? On July 4th, the little girl was officially entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System as Baby Doe. Baby Doe is the child version of the names John Doe or Jane Doe, which are typically used for unidentified bodies or people. The use of these names dates back to the 14th century and has been common for decades, especially in legal cases or situations where someone's identity is unknown or is being purposely withheld. Investigators cross-checked Baby Doe's information with several missing children, including Shoshana Black, Paula Ramirez Figueroa, Cassidy Gibbs, and Ayla Reynolds, but none were a match. Just like that, they were right back where they started. But what if the person who killed her was right under their noses their entire time?
Who would want to harm an innocent child? You just pray for justice and for peace, for their families.
They had nothing tangible, but investigators didn't give up. They expanded their search and began looking into missing children, not only from the US, but also from around the world. Over 200 cases were examined, but none matched. Yet, instead of letting the case go cold, they doubled down, determined to give this Baby Doe a name, no matter what it took. In a desperate attempt, they held a press conference at the site where the body was found and aired the reconstructed images of the child to the public. The broadcast was national. Investigators urgently pleaded for help, asking anyone who might recognize her to come forward. They also announced that the child may have gone missing just days before Independence Day, hoping this detail might trigger someone's memory. To make sure no stone was left unturned, they set up a 24-hour hotline and text line. Tips flooded in from all over the country and even from Europe and South America. But despite the overwhelming response, nothing connected to the child. 84 billboards were plastered across Massachusetts, each one pleading for answers. But still, no one stepped forward to claim the child, and the mystery only deepened. Who was Baby Doe? Why was identifying her proving so impossible? The clock was ticking, and with each passing day, the question only grew heavier. Would the truth ever come to light? In heartbreaking cases like this, it's not uncommon for the investigation to stretch on for years. Another Baby Doe case that rocked the nation started back in January 2012, and it would take over a decade to solve. That winter, police in Opelika, Alabama got a disturbing call. Skeletal remains had been found in someone's backyard. Forensic experts determined the bones belonged to a little girl, likely between 4 and 7 years old. No one knew who she was, so just like in Massachusetts, the community gave her a name: Baby Jane Doe. When an autopsy was conducted, it showed that this child hadn't just died. She had suffered. There were 15 separate fractures in her skull, ribs, arms, legs, and shoulders, all signs of brutal, repeated trauma. Her eye socket had been smashed so badly that she was likely blind in her left eye. The medical examiner believed she'd also been malnourished. Her death was ruled a homicide, and based on the condition of her remains, she could have been killed as far back as 2010. The authorities tried their best to find the killer, but they kept hitting dead end after dead end. Eventually, the case went cold. No one came forward. No one reported her missing. For 10 long years, Baby Jane Doe remained nameless. But in 2022, everything changed. Thanks to new advancements in DNA testing, investigators finally had a lead. In October, they identified the child's father as 50-year-old Lamar Vickerstaff Jr., a Navy sailor who had moved from state to state. By the end of the year, officers tracked him down to the Naval Station Mayport in Jacksonville, Florida. When detectives confronted him about his daughter, Lamar gave them nothing. He showed no emotion and offered no explanation. His wife, Ruth, claimed she had never even heard of the child. She said she didn't know who the mother was either. But that was a lie, and investigators were about to uncover the truth. Later that month, they found the girl's biological mother, Sherry Wiggins. And that's when the truth finally came out. Sherry told them her daughter's name was Amore Jovea Wiggins, and that she was born in January 2006. The distressed mother handed over court documents proving that in 2009, Lamar and Ruth had taken full custody of Amore. Sherry wasn't allowed visitation, but she'd been paying for child support ever since. Despite that, Amore had never been enrolled in school. And even more shocking, no one had ever reported her missing. By January 2023, police had enough to make arrests. Lamar Vickerstaff was charged with felony murder. Ruth Vickerstaff was charged with failure to report a missing child. As the investigation into the identity of the Massachusetts Baby Doe continued, the authorities began to form several theories on why they were hitting so many dead ends. One theory suggested that the child's parents or guardians simply hadn't reported her missing. Another theory pointed to the possibility that her family was unaware of her death entirely. It was also speculated that the child may not have been on any missing persons lists because she could have been born into an undocumented family. The most horrifying theory of all came from a criminologist who examined the case closely. He speculated that the child might have been murdered by a family member. Statistically, the criminologist argued it was far more likely that someone close to her was involved, especially given the fact that no one had reported her missing or offered any helpful information. There was yet another school of thought that believed the child's family members might have met the same fate as she did. With these theories circulating, the investigation was far from over. While the police tried to narrow their focus within the local community, the unsettling reality that the body might have been transported from elsewhere made it hard to narrow down the search. As Baby Doe's photo and tragic story made the rounds in the media, the case started gaining more attention, and tips began pouring in from all over. One tipster told the police that they had seen two children that looked like the Jane Doe, one at a store and another at a playground, with a woman clothed in a burqa. The investigators looked through the store's security cameras but couldn't find any trace of the girl. There was another tipster who claimed to have seen a heavy-set woman pushing the child in a stroller at a laundromat in November 2014. Some other callers told the authorities that the Jane Doe could be Aliaya Lunsford, a child from West Virginia who had been missing since September 2011. Aliaya did have a resemblance to the reconstructed image of the Jane Doe, but she would have been 6 years old at the time, so the authorities excluded her from the case. As the investigation went on, the authorities used Baby Doe's DNA, which was taken from hair and tooth samples, to try and identify her or possible relatives, but their attempts proved futile. When they failed to match Baby Doe's DNA to any missing persons, investigators sent her DNA samples over to the University of North Texas to create a more specific profile. The university developed mitochondrial DNA from the child's bones, which was used in the search for possible relatives. Through further forensic testing, the authorities discovered that the child had spent time in a local area, most likely Boston. There were also indications that she might have moved across the country and could have spent time in 6 states, including Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. After weeks of searching and investigation, the authorities finally got a lead that broke the case open. They got a call from someone who claimed they were neighbors with a woman named Rochelle Bond, who they could link to Baby Doe. The caller stated that they noticed that Rochelle's daughter, Bella, had not been home for some time. When the neighbor asked Rochelle and her boyfriend, Michael McCarthy, about the child, they claimed that the little girl had been taken away by the Department of Children and Families. But somehow, the neighbor believed that there was a connection between Rochelle's daughter, Bella, and Baby Doe, and decided to call the authorities. The authorities heard from the neighbor that after they stopped seeing the child with her mother, they also noticed that the mother disposed of the little girl's toys. The authorities immediately acted on this new information, and what they were about to find would leave everyone in shock. On September 17, 2015, the authorities searched the home of 40-year-old Rochelle Bond in Dorchester, Massachusetts. On September 18th, after 85 days of searching, the authorities discovered Baby Doe's real name. Her name was Bella. Bella Nevaeh Amoroso Bond. She was just 2 years old. Who was Bella Bond? But more importantly, why was no one looking for her? Bella Bond was born on August 6, 2012 at Boston Medical Center to Rochelle Bond and Joseph Amoroso. Amoroso lived in Florida and had a long criminal history. Surprisingly, he never met his daughter, but he had spoken to her over the phone. Bella lived with her mother from the day she was born until the day she died. Not much is known about Bella's life, but in the short time she has lived, she was in the care of her mother, who was a struggling drug addict. Apart from Bella, she had 2 other children who had been removed from her custody due to her inability to care for them properly. Rochelle was far from the perfect mother to her children and had also been arrested a number of times for several crimes, including prostitution. The mother was known to neglect Bella so much so that the Department of Children and Families had received calls from concerned individuals complaining that the child was not being properly cared for. The DCF visited the little girl twice, but both cases were closed within a few months. After the mother and her boyfriend were arrested, the police announced that Bella had been murdered. Michael was charged with murder while Rochelle was charged with being an accessory to the crime. The authorities believed that the mother had assisted her boyfriend in covering up her daughter's death. The neglectful mother was later charged with larceny after investigators discovered that she continued to accept welfare income and housing benefits worth nearly $1,400, even after she knew that her daughter was dead. Her bail was set at $1 million, while McCarthy was not eligible for bail. The investigation into Bella's death revealed how her mother's new relationship led to the end of her life. Rochelle met her boyfriend Michael McCarthy in January 2015. As their relationship kicked off, friends began to notice a change in her behavior. She was fond of posting pictures of Bella on her Facebook page, but that came to an abrupt end when Michael came into her life. It didn't take long before the change started affecting the child. Although Rochelle was a drug addict, she was trying her best to stay clean. But as soon as Michael moved in with her, her behavior worsened. Neighbors also stated that they often heard the little girl crying. The mother confessed to the investigators that Michael was the killer. She claimed that on the night Bella died, the child was crying and refusing to go to bed. So Michael went into her room under the guise of calming her down. But he had other intentions. Rochelle didn't go into the room with him, but when she eventually went in, she witnessed Michael brutally punching the little girl in the stomach. She noted that the child was looking swollen and gray. In other words, the child was dead. Rochelle's attorney claimed that Michael had threatened to kill her if she told anyone about what he had done.
I screamed something, I don't even know what it was, and then he hit me.
He told her that Bella was a demon and it was time for her to die. Prosecutors said that Michael wrapped the little girl's body in a garbage bag and hid it in a refrigerator.
Questioned you and he said, in the refrigerator? How? And you said, I don't know.
A few days later, the couple drove to South Boston where they dumped the body into the harbor. The body drifted for a few weeks before washing up on Deer Island. On the other hand, Michael had an entirely different story to tell. He claimed that Rochelle had murdered her daughter. His defense attorney stated that he had moved out of the house before the child was killed. He also claimed that he had witnessed Rochelle emotionally and physically abusing her daughter, which was one of the key reasons he decided to move out of the apartment. Michael's lawyer tried to paint a picture that Rochelle had fabricated the story and most likely murdered her daughter due to her drug history.
By Rochelle Bond that he killed her daughter are totally untrue and are the product of her delusional and sick mind.
The authorities also found a flaw in the mother's story because the autopsy carried out on the child's body did not show any signs of injuries consistent with her claims. Who was really telling the truth? The addict mother with everything to hide? Or the boyfriend who said she was lying all along? In February 2017, a few months before Michael's trial was set to start, the case took an interesting turn. The prosecution offered the mother a plea bargain. In exchange for her testimony against her boyfriend, she was credited with time served plus 2 years of probation. The prosecution agreed to the plea deal after taking into account Rochelle's claim that Michael had threatened to kill her if she went to the police about Bella's death. But not everyone believed that excuse, especially not Bella's paternal family. Her grandmother was furious, heartbroken, and angry.
How could you help the man who killed Bella? How dare you?
She felt that Rochelle had gotten off far too easily. Without the deal, Rochelle could have been looking at over a decade behind bars. Instead, her sentence was cut down significantly. For the grandmother, it felt like justice had been tossed aside.
You rotten hell! You rotten hell!
She had hoped the courts would make Rochelle answer for what happened to Bella. And she wasn't the only one who felt that way. Members of the public, many of whom had followed the case from the start and even joined in the search to identify the mystery girl on Deer Island, were outraged. In their eyes, Rochelle had stood by while her boyfriend murdered her child. After that, she went on to keep the secret for weeks. They believed she deserved far worse than what she got. But the deal had already been made, and no amount of outrage could undo it. During Michael's trial, which began in June 2017, the court heard disturbing facts about him. A close friend of his testified that he had a dark side that was highly interested in demons and satanic rituals. The friend stated that they had warned Rochelle about the dangers of dating Michael, but she didn't listen.
I was his friend for a long time, and he was seriously deep into the dark side of things.
Another heartbreaking testimony came from Bella's biological father, Joseph Amoroso. He told the court that he had never met his daughter and was not in her life.
The hardest part about this for me is that I will never be able to see or hold my daughter.
But he was making efforts to change the situation. He said he had moved to Florida around the time Rochelle got pregnant, and for 2 years he was away from his daughter. But when he tried to get back into her life, Rochelle lied to him about the child's whereabouts. He told the court, "I asked her, I said, 'Where's Bella?' and she said that Bella was with her godparents down in the Cape." But the father did not buy her story. He was eager to be a father and looked forward to taking his daughter to the park and buying her ice cream. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to do any of those things. After months of keeping up her lies, Rochelle decided to come clean. She told him that his daughter was dead, and like any father in this kind of situation, Joseph flipped out. He told the jury that the mother punched him in the head and warned him to behave because she didn't want to get into trouble with the authorities. The court also saw firsthand the home where baby Bella was being raised. They watched a video of the heavily cluttered home where the child lived with her drug-addicted mother and her boyfriend. It was evident that the child was not only being neglected by her mother, but she was also forced to live in an environment that was not conducive for proper growth and development of a child. Prosecutors also showed the jury disturbing pieces of evidence. The blankets that were used to wrap the child and the leggings she was wearing when her body was found were displayed in a court. Among the evidence was a book titled Demons that belonged to Michael. It was confiscated from the couple's apartment. Michael believed that he had the ability to eliminate demons from a residence, which is apparently what he thought he was doing when he murdered Bella.
I essentially believed that Bella Bond was inhabited by demons.
In the end, a jury found him guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison. He will not be eligible for parole until 2037. But that was not the end of the case. Michael McCarthy did not accept this verdict, and he decided he was not going to back down. In fact, the case was about to take a new turn. In 2020, just 5 years after Bella died, Michael decided to appeal his case. This time, he was prepared to tell the world what really happened to Bella and how Rochelle was involved in the tragic incident. While preparing for the appeal hearing, he granted an interview from behind bars where he told his side of the story. In the interview, Michael claimed he was innocent and had nothing to do with the child's death. When the interviewer asked if he killed Bella, he responded with, "Never. Never. I never harmed a hair on her head."
Did you kill Bella?
Never. I never harmed a hair on her head.
You know she was a beautiful, happy, healthy little girl.
She was a beautiful, happy, healthy little girl.
But here's where things start to get even more complicated. Despite being convicted of second-degree murder, Michael stuck to his story and kept saying he didn't kill Bella. In fact, he claimed this wasn't even a murder case at all, arguing that there was no evidence that it was a murder.
It wasn't a murder because there was no evidence that it was a...
That statement raised a few eyebrows, because the autopsy couldn't confirm exactly how Bella died. The medical examiner who testified during the trial admitted there were no visible signs of abuse on her body. That, in turn, cast some serious doubt on Rochelle's claim that Michael had punched the little girl to death. The medical examiner didn't say her story was impossible, but he did say it was unlikely. Instead, he suggested that Bella could have died from strangulation or even from a single blow that triggered a heart attack. Still, Michael denied everything. He insisted he never laid a hand on Bella and that he had absolutely nothing to do with her death. In a lot of child abuse cases that end in murder, there's a disturbing pattern where the perpetrator often turns out to be the parent's new partner. And for a while, it looked like Bella's case was no different. But then Michael started talking, and his version of events pointed in a completely different direction. So, did Rochelle lie? That question still hangs in the air, unanswered. But according to Michael, the entire case had been twisted from the start. He claimed the authorities just needed someone to blame, and he happened to fit the role. He said that since there were no eyewitnesses, the authorities decided to cut a deal with Rochelle and pin the murder on him. Then came one of the most bizarre parts of his story. Michael denied ever saying that Bella was inhabited by demons.
I essentially believed that Bella Bond was inhabited by demons.
In his words, she was a beautiful little girl, and he never saw her as a demon or anything close to that.
Did you think Bella was a demon?
Of course not. She was a beautiful little girl.
Michael also pushed back on Rochelle's claim that the body had been stored in their refrigerator for a month. He said the state police searched the fridge and his car and found nothing.
The state police swept the refrigerator and they said there was never a body in the refrigerator. And they swept my car and they said there was never a body in his vehicle.
There was never a body in the refrigerator, he said. They swept my car and said there was never a body there either. The last part of this claim would turn out to be a lie. So, if there was no forensic evidence tying him to the body's storage or transportation, how did Michael end up with a murder conviction? When asked how Bella's body ended up on Deer Island, Michael suddenly shut down. He said his lawyer had advised him not to answer that question or talk about those details publicly.
My attorney doesn't think it would be a good idea to get into anything specific like that.
Still, he wasn't done talking. Michael offered a completely different theory about how Bella died, one that had nothing to do with demons or violence. He claimed that the little girl accidentally ingested prescription pills meant for her mother. The pills are pink in color, and Bella had a pink fluid in her stomach.
Pills are pink, in color, and Bella had a pink fluid in her stomach.
It is not uncommon for children to accidentally ingest items and substances that are harmful to their bodies. But if that was the case, why was this the first time anyone had heard of it? Did the authorities miss this during the investigation, or was the boyfriend fabricating this information to derail the case and help his appeal? Both Rochelle and Michael were known substance abusers, which made it entirely possible that Bella had been exposed to drugs at some point. So, Michael's claim that she accidentally overdosed didn't sound completely far-fetched at first. But then again, the autopsy had already ruled that out. It showed that there were no drugs, no toxins, or anything in her system that could explain her death. Which meant one thing: Michael was probably lying. He ended the interview with a not-so-subtle appeal to emotion. He said, "Bella didn't get justice, first off, because they never even determined what happened to her, and I definitely didn't kill her.
And I definitely didn't kill her. So she didn't receive justice."
Then he doubled down on his claims that the mother knew more than she was letting on. Rochelle Bond clearly didn't receive justice because she committed perjury in a capital murder trial, and she's out walking around and I'm in prison for a murder I didn't commit, for a murder that didn't even happen. Michael wasn't just denying responsibility, he was denying the murder ever happened. From the beginning, the Baby Doe case had been a tangled mess. So when the authorities finally got a conviction, it felt like a win. But now, Michael's claims were threatening to unravel everything. And if what he was saying held any weight, it could lead to an entirely new trial. Michael appealed the conviction, pointing fingers at the prosecution. He argued that there wasn't enough evidence to prove he, and not Rochelle, was the killer. He also claimed that the trial was unfair because the judge let the jury hear about his interest in Satanism, but wouldn't allow testimony that could have cast Rochelle in a negative light. But wait, if Michael was open about being into Satanism, why didn't he want the jury to hear it? And what exactly was being hidden about Rochelle? The case went to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, the state's highest court. They reviewed Michael's 2017 trial and rejected his appeal. The conviction stood. The court ruled that Michael's involvement wasn't based on Rochelle's word alone. There were other damning details. The duffel bag and weights found with Bella's body were linked to him. He knew the area where the body was dumped, and, unlike Rochelle, he owned the car used to transport the body. In the end, the court ruled that the topic of his interest in Satanism was relevant in the case because it supported Rochelle's claim that he believed the child was a demon. Michael was sent back to prison and remained there till date. So just like that, the door to a new trial slammed shut. Michael was sent back to prison where he remains to this day. As for Rochelle Bond, her story didn't end with the conviction of her daughter's killer. In fact, it wasn't even the last time she'd stand in front of a judge. In May 2018, just a year after testifying in one of the most heartbreaking child murder cases in recent history, Rochelle found herself back in court, this time for violating her probation. She'd missed a scheduled appointment with her probation officer and failed a court-ordered drug test. According to court records, her supervision had been transferred to the Worcester Superior Court earlier that year since she was originally from the Fitchburg area. And with that transfer came strict conditions. She wasn't allowed to use drugs or drink alcohol, and she couldn't live with anyone who did either. On top of that, she was required to take random drug tests, undergo mental health evaluations, and complete any treatment the court recommended. But it didn't take long for her to fall back into old habits. Rochelle's probation officer revealed that she skipped a mandatory check-in on May 4th. The next day, she came clean and admitted that she'd been using cocaine. A drug test on May 7th confirmed the story and revealed new information. Not only was there cocaine in her system, but marijuana too. In court, Rochelle admitted to violating the terms of her probation. The judge agreed. She had, in fact, broken the rules. But instead of throwing the book at her, the probation officer pushed for another chance. On the condition that she'd agree to more frequent drug testing under the Avertest program and follow every condition of her probation to the letter. She'd already lost her daughter. Now, it seemed like she was on the verge of losing herself again. Do you think Rochelle Bond was rightly punished? Or could she have done more to protect her daughter? Was she hiding the truth about her child's death? And do you believe Michael is guilty or innocent? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If this story touched you, be sure to check out our next case. Sometimes, sharing these stories is the only way to ensure history doesn't repeat itself.